The reason why I'm passionate is this. We live in a time when we have long forgotten our pathway to source. The idea of a supply chain where we pay attention to every step of the supply chain. Literally the material from the earth that we take into our hands or into our stewardship, and the material that we put together and we assemble into products, and those products that we ultimately distribute and that we ultimately use and consume. We've long forgotten that the real purpose of halal, the real purpose of speaking the name of Allah when you have the opportunity to partake of this earth, had less to do about what goes into our bodies and a lot more to do about our awareness about who we are and where we belong in this universe. Because halal was really about making sure that we had two things. First of all, gratitude for being here on this planet. And second of all, confidence that we know the source from which things come and we will not defile that source. That's really the principle. That's really what this is about. And how many of you can think, if you think back across the last, I don't know, let's say 7 years, how many places in the world do you suppose we could have used a little more transparency? Finance? Would we have had the housing crisis? Would we have had the global financial crisis if we hadn't had $40 to $70 trillion of bets against humanity, which, by the way, are haram? Would we have had the currency crisis and the energy crisis and all of the other destabilizations if we had transparency and the ethical exchange of currencies and values and markets around the world? I think not. So do we have in this very moment a prophetic opportunity to use the Sharia and the halal conversations to promote something which is desperately needed across every industry sector, not just the food sector? Is it possible that we are standing on the prophetic edge of an opportunity? Not on a place where we come to an understanding that defiles what these principles are, but actually bring these principles in as not Islamic principles, but as human principles, as code that is actually our best version of the best operations, of the best form of humanity. Is that possible? I'd come back to Al-Ghazali for a moment. When he spoke about fraud, when he spoke about the supply chain, he made a very interesting observation. And his observation was that the principles of halal and the principles of Sharia finance needed to unify around one core principle, and that was that every person involved in the supply of goods or services in any form of trade anywhere around the world should themselves also be honored. So I'm going to make one very heretical observation. I think many of us involved in the halal industry need to also pay attention to the people that are involved in the halal industry. Al-Ghazali made the observation that for one loaf of bread, 1,000 laborers had to touch something. The carpenter had to build the plow. The blacksmith had to forge the iron. The farmer had to plant the seed. The seed had to be cultivated. The cultivation had to involve the miller, who had to have stones cut from the quarry. Do you see what happens? And before long, it's not just about bread. It's about the entire ecosystem of humanity that comes together to make the simple loaf of bread that is either simple or most profoundly complex. And in his observation, he said, halal needs to apply not only to the food that we consume, but to the gratitude we express towards every hand that touches any part of the process that we call halal.